Okay, everybody, we are recording. Please note that we are recording. So if you don't want your face or your face to be seen or your voice to be heard, please know you are forewarned. I do like it if you have your cameras on. You don't have to. There's no requirement in my class for that. I just think it makes for a better class experience on that. Also, I do appreciate when you guys have your mics off, that we don't have extraneous noise, but please feel free to open your mics when you need to stop me, to slow me down, to ask me questions. I'm much better at answering the questions when I hear them than following in the chat because the way I have my screens structured here. So let's chat about a couple things first. So I had a really rough, really rough technology week. And the way it affected me is I thought I almost lost my laptop, and not meaning like I lost it, but meaning like it took a poo and I was having a lot of trouble with it. I thought I was going to have to erase it and wipe it clean or get a new one. I do have a backup, but it was a backup about a week or two ago, so I was going to lose a fair amount of work. I actually hooked up my computer to not a new monitor, but a new monitor for my computer. I'm working in 3 places right now. This is what we call our Zoom room at our office, which is set up so we can close the doors, have good lighting in here. And in fact, I'm going to take my glasses off so they're not reflecting. I have my office, which is in the other part, and I sometimes do Zoom meetings from there. I do classes from this room. And then I have, my wife and I have an office at home, and we sometimes do those if we have a very early morning meeting. We sometimes do those. So instead of carrying my external monitor, which is that big everywhere, I've been carrying it between 2 offices. And the truth of the matter is, forgive my language, but it's a pain in the ass. But I do it because that way I can have all my schoolwork on one, I can have my Zoom on the other. And I hooked up another monitor that we've used for years, but not on my laptop. And it froze, it went blank. That in Mac world, we kind of call the kiss of death. And it took me quite a while. It took me hours and hours of restarting, constant restarting, deleting files, working with our Mac guy. It took me over the weekend. And I did finally get it resurrected. That monitor is now gone. I threw it out, so I can't possibly do that. I'm back to my old monitor. I'm walking it back and forth between offices. So then when I went to try and upload last week's PowerPoint for you guys and put the homework assignment that I gave you verbally, I for some reason couldn't get access to A, my email at Woodbury, and B, Moodle. And it was like, what the heck happened? So I thought maybe somehow the memory on my computer of my passwords got deleted. Unfortunately, I don't know how you guys are with tech support at Woodbury. Tech support for me has not been very quick with Woodbury. The response time is not great, and I've had challenges communicating my issues with them. So I was actually, as of yesterday, I was thinking I was going to have to cancel class. But we got it resolved. I got things figured out. I got the PowerPoint posted up there. I did get the homework assignment that was supposed to be due this week posted up there. Because I did not get it posted in a timely fashion, if you did it, great. Good for you. Thank you very much. If you did not, you have another week to do it. I just extended it 1 more week. So it's very easy. It was basically, the assignment was finding a couple integrated marketing communications items. One was going to be an ad and one was going to be something else, and just to discuss how it integrates with the brand. The last 2 chapters that we had in class, we're talking about the use of integrated marketing communications, basically marketing tools and how we use those to build brand equity. The second one was digital. That's what we had, but since I screwed up or had issues with my technology, it was no fault of yours, I just extended that homework for a week. Shouldn't take you very long if you didn't do it. And the homework that I'm going to give you this week, I'll give you after the assignment. It's already posted. And again, shouldn't take you too long. It's designed to take you about 1 hour to do. You guys also have a research assignment that you've been working on. So that I'm going to be looking forward to doing. If you integrated your homework into that, great. If you didn't, you won't be penalized for that. So I've kind of been trying to catch up on that stuff. The way we're going to move forward is, so we're going to have a discussion tonight on chapter 8 from the textbook, which is leveraging secondary brand associations. And so it's just one chapter tonight. I don't think it's going to take a long time. We've gone long a few times. I mentioned this to the people that came in early. We've gone long a couple times lately, not really beyond our time too much, but I don't think we're going to go long tonight. I think we'll be ending early tonight. I will probably have, if people have questions, I'll certainly stay on as long as we need for that. But we'll get out a little bit early. You'll have this one pretty easy homework assignment for this week. Next week, all we will be doing is a review. And the following week, we will have a midterm examination. I've already had the question, can we talk a little bit about the test format? We can talk about it a little bit this week, but the truth of the matter is I haven't written it yet. So I don't really have a lot of answers. But typically, the way I've been testing, so I did do some Moodle tests in the spring. I've also used outside third-party testing where you do it online. I think we'll be using Moodle. I want to go back in and see if there's one or two things that I can do on that I didn't do in the spring. But let's for now assume it'll be on Moodle. What I typically do during our time of COVID is I set it up so there's a 24-hour period of time you can take the test anytime during that 24 hours. So let's just say I start the test at our appointed class time on a Thursday, let's call it Woodbury time, Thursday at 7 o'clock. You would have until 7 p.m. the next day in which you can take it. I will give a time limit on the test that it'll probably be something like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I won't go longer than that. I could go a little bit shorter than that. I will always give you the amount of time that I think it'll take the average person to take the test and then a little bit more. So I'm not going to try and squeeze it down. But here's the one thing I'm going to do. So this is a little bit of give and take on your part and on my part. For those of you that have had me before in classes, it'll be similar to the type of tests that I've done before. The way I like to give tests is short answers. I think it's the best way to help students understand. I think it's the best way for students to display their knowledge, and that's what I like to test on. Unfortunately, it takes a lot longer for me to test. I'm sorry, to grade tests that have short answers and short essays. It's also more difficult for me to do that online because I usually do it with a lot of notations. And unfortunately, that takes a lot of time. So in the spring, those of you that had me in the spring, I actually shifted to a little bit more in the way of objective testing, meaning true, false, multiple choice, very, very short answers. And that's mostly what this will be. If there's any kind of essay question, it might be one. And when I'm saying essay, I'm not saying like 3 pages. I'm talking about maybe a page or a half a page that I would expect. So that's probably what the format will be. Here's the other thing, and I'm not sure what your other instructors are doing. I don't think I am in the majority with the way that I test. Maybe I am, but from what I read online, I'm in a couple different teachers groups online. There was a lot of discussion about testing over the summer. And here's my philosophy on testing. There are methods such as Proctorio and a couple others where I actually can have you take a test. You have to have a camera. I have to be able to watch you. Personally, I think that's way too much work, and I don't want to sit here in a test and watch each one of you. I think it's a waste of my time, and I think it's not being trusting of you. So I do it the exact opposite way. I say open book, open note, open internet, use whatever you want. I want you to get the answers right. And even if you, a lot of people say to me, but doesn't that make it easy? Well, maybe it makes it easy, but my argument is you still have to know what the right answer is. So in this case, you may need to find it. You might look on your computer, you might look on notes, you might look on a textbook, maybe you even search for something on the internet. That's why I limit the time so it won't be a really long period of time for the test, you're going to need to work through that test relatively quickly. But I'll give you ample time. I'm just not going to give you tons of time. My suggestion is, if you haven't studied, if you haven't done any of the reading, if you haven't been following in class, um, you will not have enough time on that test to try and learn everything during the test. That will be a mistake. Second thing is, the way that we can set up the tests, I can set up the test so that the questions are randomized, which means that Angel might get question number 1 as number 1, but Louisa might get question number 1 as question 17 on hers. So I'm going to request of you, on your honor and ethically, to not take the test with anybody else. But also, I learned from last semester, when I randomized the test and some people wrote the same answer for the wrong questions, I knew that those two people were taking the test together. So I just don't even want to go through that. I think I'm giving you a fair amount. The fact that you can use your own textbook, you can use your notes, you can search on the internet, you can do what you want on that. I don't think for this class we're doing anything that needs any outside stuff like calculators. So that's what it's going to be, but I'll have a much better idea of the actual content of the test next week. And that's all we'll be doing next week. We'll be doing a review of the first week through this week, and we'll answer questions about the test. And then a week later, you'll take the test. On the week that you're taking the test, you are not going to meet with me. You're going to just take the test. What I'm probably going to do is pre-record a very brief, it's not going to be a lecture, but a very brief discussion of your brand projects for later in the semester. So anytime during that week after you take the test, it'll probably be 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long. I'll just record it like a Zoom call like this, and I'll talk about what you're going to do for that project so you can get started on it. Again, the way I like to teach is the first half of the semester tends to be more learning, and the second half tends to be more doing. And that's really what we're looking at doing in this class. So that's sort of a quick view of what we're doing tonight, what we're doing next week, what we're doing the week after. Anybody have any questions on any of that? No? I'm hearing somebody rattling around, but maybe that's just a mic going on. Okay, so if you guys are okay with it, should we just go ahead and go into chapter 8? Do that, move forward, and get you guys out of here. So I'm gonna, let's see, I'm with my new monitor setup. Let me change what I'm doing. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna go here. Okay, this works okay. You know, before I get going, since I did change a couple things, can you guys just, with a thumbs up or a thumbs down, are you hearing me okay? If you're hearing me okay, can you just give me a thumbs up? Yeah, okay, good. You're seeing me okay? Camera's looking okay? I'm a little, I'm gonna say, can you see me okay? I'm probably not looking great. I've had a couple of very long days, long nights. So I actually, I went so far as to put on a collared shirt for you guys tonight. I was in a grubby t-shirt just a little while ago. So hopefully I'm at least presentable for class. Okay, so chapter 8 in the textbook, leveraging secondary brand associations to build brand equity. Again, a typical textbook fashion. That's a big kind of convoluted title to a chapter right there. But my little subhead there, what are secondary brand associations and how do we use those to build brands or build brand equity? That's really what we're going to talk about tonight. And when I begin to explain this, hopefully this will kind of make a lot of sense, and some of this will probably be secondary, and you might have learned some of this in previous marketing classes. So can everybody see the screen okay? Are you seeing that title slide? All right, then we're going to keep moving. Okay, so if you go back, the first 3 chapters of our textbook, we're really sort of learning about brands, and we defined brands, and we defined some of those things that are related to brands. We talked about the benefits of branding sort of in modern marketing. But once we got to chapter 4, we shifted the way the textbook shifts, and with the whole goal of building brand equity. Another way of saying that is we want to build brands. If we work for a brand, if you guys want to be entrepreneurs and start businesses and create brands, our goal is to build those brands. And remember that a brand is like a financial investment. When you do it well, it grows in value. And when you do it poorly, it actually loses value. And I think most of us, if we work on brands or we create brands on our own, we actually want those brands to grow. We want them to grow in value. And so when they grow in value, it gives us the chance to make more money and to potentially sell that brand for more money than it was when we created the brand. That's kind of the goal here. We want to grow it. And if we're working for people, we want that brand to do well so that we keep our jobs and we keep making money. So in chapter 4, we identified brand elements, a lot of those things that are related to brands. You guys had a homework assignment on that. Chapters 5 and 6, we really talked about marketing issues and IMC, integrated marketing communications, advertising and PR, all that stuff that we do, kind of the fun advertising and promotional stuff. And then chapter 7 that we were on last week, we talked about sort of the digital channels, this whole new world of digital marketing that we have. So chapter 8, now we're beginning to sort of move into a new area of discussion. And I think once we're finished with this discussion, in my estimation, when I read the textbook this summer, I thought this was a good point for us to then sort of have our midterm exam. So hopefully there's a logic to what we've been reading. This is one of the few books I've ever taught out of where I've actually gone at least through 8 chapters in a row. I almost always skip around in textbooks because I think the people that write textbooks sometimes write good info, but they put it in crazy order. This is one of the few times I've ever gone really straight through, up through chapter 8. So let's kind of define this idea of a secondary brand association. Remember, anything that anybody thinks about a brand is a brand association. And we, as managers of brands, of people working on brands, we can purposefully try to associate things with our brands. But it's equally important what the customers associate with our brands. Remember, branding is a two-way street. Part of it is what we say, excuse me, and what we do with brands. And part of it is what they say or think about our brands. Excuse me just a minute, I'm going to grab a quick drink. And so this definition that you kind of see here is not really in the textbook. I couldn't find what I thought was a good one in the textbook. So I just sort of wrote this up. But a secondary brand association, the way the textbook is talking about brand associations, is the linking of a brand to other things. And this could be things, this could be people, this could be events, this could be other entities, with the intention of building brand equity. Well, we're going to go through these. We're going to identify 8 different categories of things, and we'll go through those tonight. So this whole idea, this secondary brand associations, is to link the brand that we're working on to other brands or even to our own brand as a means of building equity. Okay, so the textbook identifies 8 basic categories of ways that we can link to a brand. I'm going to go through this list of 8 right now, and then we're going to talk about a few things. I'm going to track along the way the textbook does, but a little bit later in our discussion, we'll actually go over each one of these 8. So if you don't get everything right now, don't worry, we will get to these and explain these a bit more. And do remember, this PowerPoint is already posted on Moodle. So if you want to listen and just take light notes, that's okay with me. If you want to take detailed notes, that's okay too. But know that the PowerPoint is up there already for you guys. So the first thing that we can do is we can sort of link a brand to a company. And in a very simple sense, companies can be brands. Brands don't necessarily need to be companies. So there are times where you might have a brand and you might link it to a company. Just a kind of a random example that comes to mind to me is the automobile company General Motors has a number of different brands underneath the General Motors umbrella. One of those brands is Chevrolet. So Chevrolet is made by General Motors. General Motors itself is a corporate brand. Chevrolet is a automobile brand. To compare and contrast that, if you think of Ford Motor Company is both a company and a brand. Now, they do have a couple other brands like Lincoln Mercury, but really Ford is Ford. And Chevrolet owns a number of different brands. And when you go internationally, you find General Motors has even more brands. So there are times where Chevrolet advertises themselves as Chevrolet, and there are times that they advertise themselves as being a part of General Motors. And if, for example, they are talking about things like fleet sales or selling lots of cars to big companies, it benefits them when they talk about being a part of the largest automobile manufacturer in the United States. And they might actually link themselves to their own parent company, whereas in many ads, you don't really see General Motors in a Chevy ad. So you can link a brand to a company. You can also link a brand to a place. I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit. But very simply, if I was to talk about a product, let's say, well, I'll use an example that I have later in here just to make it easy. If I was to talk about pasta, if we were to link pasta to a country, what country might we want to link pasta to? Somebody open up their mic and tell me.
Italy?
Yeah, Italy. Wouldn't that make sense? We kind of think of Italy as being the place where pasta comes from. So if we are Berea pasta, we might want to play up Italy. And that's how we would link to Italy, so that we're gaining something by linking to Italy. We might link to channels of distribution. Again, technical way, let's simplify it. Brian, can you simplify it for us? Yes, I'll make it easy. Think of the store that a product is built or is sold in. So you have a company that makes a product, they can sell it in many, many different stores. They can sell it online, they can sell it in a brick and mortar store. So if you were to go to, trying to think what is around here, you guys may not know it there. In this end of the valley, there is a jewelry store that is called Polachex. And if you want to buy a Rolex or an Omega or a Tag watch, that's where you have to go. If you want to buy nice diamonds, it's one of the best places to go. It's also very, very expensive. So we know of that as being a place where we buy these quality goods. If I was looking to buy a Rolex, let's say I won some money in the lottery and I was, going to treat myself to a Rolex, and I found out that Rolexes were being sold at 7-Eleven, well, would selling a Rolex at 7-Eleven have any impact on the Rolex brand? Somebody unmute their mic and tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would? So what kind of reaction would you have? What would you think about it?
Like lesser of a quality because you're going to 7-Eleven.
It kind of brings it down, doesn't it? So those of you that are into fashion, think about your favorite fashion good, right? Do you want that to be sold at the outlet mall? Well, I think we all kind of want to maybe sometimes find something at the outlet mall and think that we're the only person that found it there and we got a great deal. But we actually don't want our luxury brands to be discounted too much, because then we lose something of that luxury, right? So where you buy it can actually be a link to that brand. And what we're going to learn about some of these is there's positive and negative aspects of linking a brand. Now, we can also link our brands to other brands. We're going to talk about a few different ways of doing this. I think of computers, whenever I think of co-branding, which is one of the ways of linking to another brand. It's actually a unique kind called ingredient branding that we'll talk about. But I think of computers because I think of, for a long time, we basically had Apple computers and everybody else. Apple works on the Apple system and everybody else works on the PC system. So PCs were sort of known to be somewhat generic. In the early days, you had IBM, you had Hewlett-Packard, you had a couple big brands, Compaq. But then we sort of went through an era of non-branded PCs, and you could buy them for a lot less. Well, in that era of Apple was Apple. If you bought an Apple, you got what Apple made. But in the era of the generic computers, they put in different components, and we began seeing the branding of Intel, which was a computer chip and processor company. Very, very tech. The average person didn't know of them until computer companies started advertising that they had, and what was the tagline? Does anybody know the tagline from those campaigns? Intel inside. And that was sort of the mark that your PC was a quality PC because it had an Intel chip inside. So a lot of companies, even the big companies like a Hewlett Packard, marketed their Hewlett Packard brand as having Intel inside. It was co-branding. It was using two brands to work together to boost the value of it. And so we can link to other brands in a common way. Not all linking to other brands is co-branding, but much of the time it will be co-branding.
I have a question, Professor.
Sure.
Would licensing be considered as a
Form of
secondary branding? Like let's say Disney licensing. Let's say Disney licenses like Lego or something else. You know, would
So the simple answer is yes. That's a great question. And I actually have licensing on the slide that's a little bit further on when we talk about this more. But yes, licensing is a very common way. And in some of the areas that you guys study at Woodbury, such as animation and fashion, licensing is a very big part of co-branding. Now, we can also attach characters. We can link to characters. We can create characters, or we can link to existing characters. If you think of toys, where somebody makes a toy, but then they link to an existing cartoon character, and in the case that you just asked, licensing, you might find a toy that is a SpongeBob SquarePants toy, and they license the use of the SpongeBob name and likeness, and they're really using that as a means of boosting their own product sales or their own brand sales. So characters, we can link to characters. We can also link our brands to spokespeople, to people that give us endorsements. You know, you think of the Michael Jordans of this world, you think of the Tiger Woods, but there's many, many others, and we'll discuss a few more of those. You can link your brand to an event, different events, and you typically do this through sponsorships. Sometimes you actually link to people through sponsorships as well. My bicycle company, for example, sponsors racers. You guys can think of it in terms of influencers online. So there's lots of ways that we can connect our brand to other brands, other people, other things. And then the eighth one on our list is just simply what the textbook calls other third-party sources. Easiest way to sort of think about these, again, kind of a technical term, other third-party sources of leveraging secondary associations. It starts to get technical, but what are we talking about? Well, a third-party source might be things like an award or a review that our product gets. If we want, in my world, if I want my client's mountain bike to gain some brand equity, I send a sample of my client's mountain bike to a magazine called Mountain Bike Action, which is the #1 mountain bike publication in the United States. And it's not the largest in the world, but it's the most respected in the world. So if you get your magazine in there, and honestly, even if I advertise there, I get some halo effect by people going, oh, that bike is in there. Oh, they tested that. And I gain from their brand equity in my brand. And that's third-party sources. So those are the 8. Now, we're going to explain a few more things, but then we're going to go back through each one of those 8 as you gain more understanding, and hopefully we'll see more examples of that. So in the textbook, and if anybody wants a citation on this, I'll say it's on, this discussion begins on page 262. And the textbook gives an example of brand linking using the brand Solomon. Is anybody here in class familiar with Solomon? I actually don't have everybody on my screen, so if you're saying yes or waving your hand. I can't see everybody in class the way I've got this set up. But is anybody familiar with the brand Solomon? If you are, maybe just unmute your mic and tell me how you know the brand. Nobody knows Solomon. That's going to tell me that we don't have a lot of skiers in class. Anybody an avid skier in class? So Solomon is a brand that really began with ski items. I think it was back in, what does the textbook say, 1947. Those of us that do ski, we first know of Solomon as being ski bindings. When you put your boot onto the ski and you step down and it holds onto your foot, that's a ski binding. And Solomon makes those. Well, in time, they began making skis, they began making poles, they began making other accessories, and then they moved into things like boots and shoes. If you go to REI right now, you will find Solomon shoes there. So the textbook walks us through linking in each of those different ways to the brand Solomon. So I'm going to take a moment. I'm not going to read everything verbatim, but I'm going to read you bits of about 3 or 4 paragraphs from the textbook to show you, if we were in class right now, what we'd actually do is we'd do this sort of on a whiteboard so that we could see this laid out. But for now, just sort of listen to the way these kind of work. So the textbook says that those first 3 links, companies, countries, and channels, it refers to those as source factors. Those are things that you actually have control of because it's probably your company. And if we talk about the country or the state or the area where your company is from, you control that. And distribution, that's where you decide to go. As soon as you go out to like celebrities, well, they have a say in it, so you don't control that as much. So they call those first 3 source factors. And if we look at Solomon and how we'll start with those source factors and go through the others, Solomon could leverage associations to the corporate brand by sub-branding products. For example, they could call a product the Avenger Ski by Solomon. So because Solomon has been around for around 70 years, they could actually create the name of a product, but say Avenger by Solomon. And that's a way they might link it to their own branded company. Another thing they could do, Solomon is headquartered in Europe. They could play up Europe. Their headquarters are at the foot of the Alps. So they literally could say Solomon, born, bred, designed in the Alps. And you could associate that brand with the Alps. Moving on, so that's maybe a country or geographical area. Channels of distribution. Well, Solomon could sell through places like Big 5 Sporting Goods or maybe Walmart. What Solomon typically does is they sell through higher end ski shops. So even if you guys aren't skiers, you guys already sort of identified how the distribution channel could have an impact. Solomon sells their products not at steeply discounted rates, not at crazy expensive rates, but I would call it at premium rates. And that's best done through independent ski shops. So they're sort of keeping up their quality image and their value by the association that they're not sold in big sporting goods stores. They're sold really through specialty stores. Okay, Solomon could also look at doing things like co-branding. The example that the textbook says, Solomon could attempt to co-brand by identifying a strong ingredients in its grip or its frame or its strings. Solomon also has moved into tennis. That's what they're referring to in the grip and the strings. So for example, if they are using a special rubber grip on a tennis racket, they could associate themselves with Goodyear tires, known for rubber. Now, the textbook uses that as an example. It's not saying they should, but it's saying they could. They actually have used it for rubber on some of the soles of their shoes. I gotta be honest, and this is one of those where when I see things in textbooks I don't necessarily agree with, I'll let you guys know. To think that my shoes have the same rubber as Goodyear tires, doesn't make me feel great about the shoes. Doesn't make me feel bad, but it's not like I go, oh, Goodyear tires, they use the same rubber on my shoes, I have to buy those shoes. I don't get that. That's not me. But the textbook is simply using that as an example. Characters. The textbook thinks that it's maybe not a great way of linking a character to Salomon products, probably not in skiing. Hang on just a second. What do I have here? Probably not just in skiing, but I would actually say if Salomon wanted to sell tennis rackets to kids, then actually using a character might be a good thing. I'm not sure a character would be a good thing for adults, but if you want to attract kids, my daughter played youth tennis, and we had to look for youth tennis gear for her. Seeing a character that I know might have drawn me to that brand. Using spokespeople. Well, I will tell you, in things like tennis, which they're building more and more Salomon tennis products, when you sign on a sponsorship or have an endorsement from somebody like Serena Williams, Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, that can be really, really, really powerful in sports. And so you could link your brand to a very successful athlete or celebrity. Events. Well, I guarantee you Salomon does sponsor events. I know they sponsor some ski events. I know they sponsor some other outdoor running events. And I believe they sponsor tennis events. And in doing so, they are linking their brands to those events. So the better those events are seen, the more Salomon gets to increase its brand equity through sponsoring those events. And then lastly, if a magazine were to give out ski awards or a tennis magazine were to give out tennis awards for new products of the year, if Salomon happened to win one of those, well, that would be a great linkage. That might be something they would want to put in their marketing communications, put in their advertising or their PR. So there's one brand example given in your textbook of how we can link our brand to other brands, other people, other things in various different ways. So I'm going to keep going, but I'm just going to pause there for a second. Does that seem to make sense to everybody? Are you getting the gist of what a secondary linking or a secondary association is? Yes? No? Any questions on that before we go forward? Okay, so let's think about these brand associations. When we link to a different brand, when we link to a person or a place or an event, we actually can create new brand associations. So our brand has things that people think about, and the brand or the thing that we link to has things that people think about. And when we put them together, those could create new feelings. You guys gave an example of that. If we buy a Rolex watch at a really nice store, that means one thing. And if we find out they're selling them at 7-Eleven or Walmart, that means something else. As we mash those together, we sort of have this new idea of, wait a minute, why are we seeing this really expensive watch at really inexpensive stores? It can actually create new brand associations. Know that these brand associations that we create through linking, they can be positive, they can be negative, and they can be neutral. So in other words, we can do this successfully and gain brand equity. We can link poorly or associate poorly and decrease quality or value. And sometimes we link with somebody that really is just not very important or that people don't know. And so we can kind of have a neutral brand association. If we paid a lot for the licensing and the licensing doesn't do much, we just wasted money. So just know that we can have different outcomes. And that's where some of the art of branding and creating co-brands and creating brand associations, that's where some of the art comes in. So Key factors that can affect an existing brand when you associate it with a secondary. Number one, it's very important to look at the awareness of the other entity. So when computers started connecting to Intel, the average consumer didn't know much about Intel. But what they did is they educated salespeople at computer stores all around the world that Intel was the #1 biggest and most respected chip maker. And so they were able to make that, to gain awareness by doing an effort of getting that branding out. Number two, is the brand meaningful? Is the brand that you are associating with, is it meaningful? Does it have any interest? You might associate with a brand. Let's think of a clothing product. If a clothing product did a license with a celebrity, that might mean something. If Nike comes out with a shirt and they call it the, the Michael Jordan shirt, that might have meaning to it. But if they came out with a shirt, if Nike came out with a shirt and called it the Chevrolet shirt, well, people might know Chevrolet, but it doesn't add any value to it, and you actually risk the possibility it might take away from value. So the association should have some kind of meaning to it to gain value. And then the last is, can you transfer the knowledge of this other brand to your brand? And again, I'll go back to that example of Intel. I think when people started advertising the use of Intel processors and chips, it was risky. I think it was risky. Not a lot of us knew, but they did a lot of effort through PR, through personal selling, to get people to know who Intel was and why a computer was worth more when it had Intel inside. They actually worked on a way of transferring the knowledge that salespeople and programmers knew to the general public. So 3 factors that can really help you with your branding. When you're working on your branding project in the second half of the semester, I will probably make as a requirement that you do some form of co-branding as a part of the project. And these are 3 things you will need to look at when you do that. So this is straight out of the textbook. I just wanted to give this to you. This isn't something to, necessarily memorize, but rather, if you think of your brand, the brand you're working for, the brand that you've created on the left, and you're going to associate yourself with some other entity, that's the one on the right. Every single one of those attributes might carry with it knowledge that can be transferred across the 2. Awareness of the product, attributes of the product or brand, benefits of the product or brand, images or imagery of the other brand. Just simple thoughts that people have about the brand, feelings, do they like it, do they not like it? Attitudes, do they think it matters, is it relevant? And even experiences with the brand. So if you think about it, if you are associating yourself with another brand and somebody has a bad experience with the brand you're associating with, chances are that's going to reduce your brand equity. So when you're looking at associating with other brands and other entities, you need to do your due diligence to make sure that you're not associating with somebody that will actually bring down the value. And I think this is just a good example. This visual that's in the textbook is, it's much more important to look at that other entity deeply rather than just saying, oh, let's do a promotion with Nike. Well, Nike actually may have some baggage that you don't want to be associated with. Textbook talks about 2 styles of linking. It actually doesn't use the term styles. I put that in there to just make it a little more understandable. One they called commonality. So the example that it gives in the textbook, which I think is pretty simple, if you think of New Zealand, it's a cool country. I haven't been there. I'd like to go sometime. It's jokingly, if you want to get to Australia, go to New Zealand and turn right. It's down that way. Very neat country. It's got very nice people. They have almost no COVID there right now. But what they're also known for is sheep. They actually have more sheep on the island of New Zealand than they have people. So with New Zealand being a cool place to travel and sheep being an animal that generates wool, you can, because they're common, because they are related, you can put those together. And so what do people see? They see the reference to things like New Zealand wool. And that's a linking right there. That's linking a place to a product. And what a brand might do is a brand of clothing might say this was made from 100% pure New Zealand wool. And for people in a lot of the country, probably a lot of places other than Scotland, that's probably a positive association. Then the linking can also be complementary. And in fact, the textbook uses this term complementarity, which I don't really like, so I just say complementary. An example that it gives in the textbook is, we all know ice cream and we all know coffee. And if you think about it, there are times where maybe we have a little bit of ice cream after a meal and we might have a little coffee, right? Those complement each other. They're not exactly the same things, but they do complement each other. Well, in Canada, Cold Stone Creamery, the chain of ice cream stores, actually partnered up with Tom Hortons coffee shops. And so when you're driving along roads in Canada, you very well might see a Cold Stone Creamery and Tom Hortons coffee shop together under the same roof. Two different brands that complement each other by working together in the way they market and even in the way they create their stores. So two different ways of sort of looking at linking. You might do things because there's commonality between the two entities, and sometimes it's just complementary. Now, I'm just going to put this in here. The textbook actually talks about brand extensions in a few other places in the book, but I think it's important here to simply raise this topic. I know I've mentioned it. We haven't really defined it per se, but a brand extension is when we create a new product or a new brand from an existing brand, that we extend the brand. And the examples that I give here, long before you guys were around, we didn't have Diet Coke. When I was a kid, Coca-Cola had a product that was called Tab. I find it kind of funny right now. My wife is watching, I think it's on Netflix, a series called The Americans, and it's about Russian spies. But it takes place in like the 70s, I think, maybe, or the 80s. And they actually went up to a machine that was a Tab machine. Well, if you do a Google search, you'll see the logo for Tab. That was a Coca-Cola product, and it was modestly successful. Coca-Cola decided they were going to phase out Tab as their diet drink and create Diet Coke. Tab was not a brand extension of Coca-Cola. It was its own brand. But when Coke came out with Diet Coke, that is what we call a brand extension. They extended the brand of Coke by creating a new product that leveraged the Coke brand. And they created this new sub-brand called Diet Coke. We call that a brand extension. We're going to talk more about brand extensions during the semester. Brand extensions can be very successful, and there's times where they actually can be bad. Know that when you create a brand extension, the value of that goes back both ways. It goes to the new brand and to the old brand. And if your new brand is not good, it hurts the old brand. So you don't want to just throw your brand onto a lot of new products. You want to do your research, you want to do testing, and you want to make sure that it still adheres to all the brand characteristics that we've been talking about the last few weeks, that it stands up to the brand character. So you don't want to have a Diet Coke that is really bad. You don't want to have a Diet Coke that tastes terrible. Coca-Cola, I'm sure, did a lot of taste testing before they rolled out cans that said Diet Coke. Because remember, again, Coca-Cola is arguably, if not the top, one of the top brands in the world, valued and again, there's lots of people, different people that value it. One of the recent readings that I had said Coca-Cola is worth somewhere between 800 and 100, I'm sorry, 80 and 100 billion dollars, not including any of their assets. The brand alone, just the name and the logo, potentially worth $100 billion. So you want to protect that brand. And with Diet Coke, they actually improved the character of the brand. You do that through brand extensions. Okay, so let's go look at those 8 key areas. And we're just going to do this, and this will probably finish up, I don't know, hopefully 10, 15 minutes and we'll be done. But this is kind of the last of the discussion in chapter 8. Let's go back over those 8 things that we said at the beginning of our discussion. Let's look at a company and the linkage to a company. Now, when we link to a company, we have a brand. We may create a new brand. We may adopt or modify an existing brand. We may combine a brand, an existing brand with a new brand. So again, linking to your own company, where that really works is when we have a parent company. There are times where you could potentially link to a company that is not your own, but most of the time you're going to link it to something that you're related to. I have done this with my bicycle brand. The bicycle brand is KHS Bicycles, a mid-sized bike brand here in the United States, but they own their own bicycle factory in Taiwan. That doesn't sound like much, but most bike brands that you see do not own a factory. Specialized bicycles are made in other companies' factories. Trek Bicycles has a small factory in Wisconsin, but the vast majority of their bikes are made in China. They're made at factories that they don't own. So when I've done trade advertising for my bike company, I link them to the parent company, which is called United Engineering Corp. And is its own factory. So when you're linking to a company, you're usually going to want to look at, how does my brand relate to that company? Can these two coexist? Should they be separate? Should they be modified? Can we adopt what we have in the existing brand? These are some of the questions you should ask when you're looking at linking with the brand. Now, so I'm going to do this real quick. You guys, if you don't mind, go ahead and open up your mics for a minute. I'm just going to say these real quick and just go ahead and kind of shout out the association. So we did this first one where when I said pasta, you guys said Italy. But if I say milk, what geography pops into? Has anybody ever seen an ad from the California Milk Board?
Oh, yes.
They're actually the ones that created Got Milk. So you can actually link something like a product like milk to a geography. Cheese is another one. If I say cheese, where do you think of?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is one. There's a Wisconsin Cheese Board. They do a lot of advertising. California is another one.
Tillamook.
Any other places?
Oregon.
What's that? Oregon?
Oregon.
And I heard another one.
I said France. I don't know why I always think of.
No, that's exactly right. Actually, a number of the European countries have huge cheese exports. Any one of those countries, a brand could link itself to. If you are trying to sell a really high, I actually think France is a great example. If you're trying to sell a high-end gourmet cheese in the US, I have a feeling you might be better off if you link it to France than if you link it to Wisconsin. Now, I'm not knocking Wisconsin. My family comes from Wisconsin. But if you're trying to talk about high-end cheese, I think we think of Wisconsin as like cheddar and Velveeta and, American cheese. But if you're talking about like a really high-end, cheese that's going to be used in a, Gordon Ramsay kind of recipe, well, no, France is probably going to boost your equity on that. If I say whiskey, do you guys think of a place?
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Whose whiskey is in Tennessee?
Jack Daniels.
Jack Daniels. In fact, they even they actually call it a sour mash whiskey. And the reason they call it a sour mash whiskey is across the river from where Jack Daniels is Kentucky. And in the early days of whiskey making, if you wanted to call it straight Kentucky bourbon, it had to be in Kentucky. And Jack Daniels made the exact same product, but he wasn't in Kentucky. So he actually created the name Tennessee Sour Mash Whiskey. Can anybody think of another place that comes to mind when we say whiskey?
Ireland or Scotland?
Yeah, so Scotland is actually the home of whiskey that we in the US would call Scotch. Whiskey, there's actually two main families of it. One is Scotch, and the main grains that you use would be things like barley. And in the US, the main grain that you would use would likely be things like corn. And I won't bore you guys to tears with this, but I'm a member of a small group called the Woodland Hills Bourbon Society, so I've done some research in bourbon. Because you guys are business students, I'll just give you this little sidebar. Do you know that bourbon actually has economic history to our country? A lot of the people that migrated through the colonies and into places like Tennessee and Kentucky, they were great areas for corn. You didn't grow a lot of corn in Europe, but when you came to the US and the Native Americans grew corn, we learned to grow corn. It's pretty easy to grow. The problem with corn is it goes bad. It's kind of hard to store for a long time. You can try to store it, but you get things like bugs in there and it goes bad. So corn only lasts a while. And as people grew more and more corn and they created bigger and bigger fields, they had, if they didn't sell it off, they had trouble storing it. Well, those people that came to the US from Ireland, England, and Scotland brought with them the ability to make whiskey. So what they did is they took that corn, they mashed it up, put it in hot water with some yeast and some sugar. The yeast eats the sugar, the yeast works away at the corn, and you create what's called either a mash or a, in Scotland they call it a, it's not a malt, it's a word like that. Sorry, I'm forgetting that word. I shouldn't forget that. But with bourbon, they'd call it a mash. If you were to simply take that and strain it and chill it, we'd call it beer or ale. But what they do and what we call distilling is they boil it. It goes up through those windy tubes, and out the other end drips the distillation of it. And it goes from being about 8 or 10 proof to about 160 proof. That's about 80% alcohol with just a teeny little bit of flavor. And then they cut that with a little bit of water, and then they put it in barrels. It's clear when it goes into the barrels, but once it's in the barrels for a year, 2 years, and bourbon has to be in a barrel for 2 years to be called bourbon, it turns the brown color that we know. Well, those settlers in Kentucky and Tennessee figured out if they make whiskey, whiskey lasts for years, even decades in a bottle. So from an economic standpoint, they actually used the making of whiskey as a way of protecting their investment in corn. If you grew a lot of corn and you couldn't eat it all, you made whiskey. And guess what? They had a lot of corn in Kentucky and Tennessee. Guess what? That's the #1 area of the United States that now makes whiskey. I'll just give you one other little side note and we'll move on. The other funny thing that I learned, wrote an article for a magazine on a small moonshine distillery. Whiskey has to be aged to be called whiskey. And to be called bourbon, it has to be aged at least 2 years. To be legal moonshine, a whiskey does not need to be aged, but it does need to be barreled. It means they actually have to pour it into a barrel, and then it can stay there as long as they want. They can immediately pour it into bottles, and they call it moonshine. Well, that's good for a company that makes it, because as soon as you make your whiskey, you can sell it. But if you're making bourbon, you make it, then it has to sit on a shelf for 2 years. That's a financial investment that you want to pay off. And now you think some of the scotches that are 10, 15, 20 years old, you're waiting a long time to get your investment back. I found out from this one moonshine maker. I thought this was the funniest thing in the world. I asked him, how long is your moonshine in the barrel? And he said, we literally pour it in the top of the barrel and we have a hole in the bottom and it goes right out into the bottles. So by law, it is barreled, but it's barreled for a matter of a couple seconds. But it adheres to the US law for the making of whiskey. So you guys just learned more about whiskey than most people know. If you didn't have interest in it, I'm sorry, but I just find that, kind of an interesting side note. But whiskey is one of those that can be associated with geography. Okay, channels of distribution. Again, keep your mics open for just a minute. If I talk about selling a product, I'm just going to name a couple random products. Let's go back to our Rolex example. If we sold a Rolex at JCPenney, what would you think about it? Just go ahead and shout out an answer or two. Is that good? Is that not good?
Not good.
Not good. So it might not be good for Rolex. I think it would take down the Rolex brand. What would it do for the JCPenney brand?
Elevate it?
Maybe. I'm not sure if it would. It might elevate it for a little bit. If I was to
Might
use
be
it,
confusing.
I think it could be confusing. And that actually, Angel, that's a really good point about brand associations. One of the things you don't want to do is make people more confused about your brands. And I think that is sometimes what happens. An example I was just reading about this last week, big baller brand shoes, right? LeVar Ball, Lonzo Ball, they came out with these shoes. They were going to be $500 pairs of shoes. He was saying that the company was going to be worth $1 billion. Well, it was a dismal failure. And it turns out that a year ago, they had somebody who invested a little money in them. And it turns out they were literally like selling shoes out of the backs of cars, out of the backs of trucks, at little events that were around. And I don't think you can sell $500 basketball shoes out of the backs of cars or trucks and keep up much of a brand equity. But now let's look at Nordstrom. Okay, so think of a product. I'm going to use an example. Everybody familiar with Bomba socks? If you aren't, I've never been very much somebody into socks. My wife gave me some Bomba socks. They are now my favorite socks in the world. Absolute favorite socks. And I could never understand how you could pay a lot of money for socks. Now I understand. So if Bomba socks were available at Nordstrom, what would you think that would do to the Bomba brand and to the Nordstrom brand?
I think it's a good match because Nordstrom, you have more higher end products. So I think it would just be a good match for the brands.
I do too. That's exactly why I put it here. You actually said it better than the way I was thinking. I was saying, yeah, I think it wouldn't really hurt either brand. I think they would work well, but I think the way you said it's even better. It's a good match. So hopefully that would be something that would over time increase the value of both. Oh, I can get my favorite socks at Nordstrom. And it being at Nordstrom, a lot of people might look at them and go, hey, those might be good socks, right? So that's where a channel of distribution might be positive. But it's not just stores. Also think of the type of places. So if you say a product is sold at a mall, let's do this one a different way. What would be a product that you would think, or a brand that would be good to be sold at a mall? What's a product that you think would gain value by people knowing it is sold at a mall?
It's as seen on TV, like the products that you might see on an infomercial or
Yeah,
things like that.
maybe. What other products might be increase in value because they're sold at a mall? I'm thinking some of you fashion marketing people might be able to help on this one. So one of the things that came to mind to me, and I'm not great on fashion brands, I will freely admit, but being that I have a daughter and there's no way in the world she would go to the mall with me, and she hasn't been willing to go to the mall with me for maybe the last 5 or 10 years. But when we would go to the mall, on occasion, we would go to stores that I wouldn't necessarily go to. One of those brands was H&M. As a father who would come birthday time or Christmas time and I was looking for a gift, it was really convenient for me to know I could go to the Westfield Mall 5 minutes from my office. There was an H&M that my daughter liked going into, and to me, that was a value. Now, not all H&M stores are at malls, but knowing that they could be at a mall, I don't think that hurts the H&M brand. I was shocked to see that there were products in there I was expecting to pay 5 times the amount, and I was surprised at how inexpensive some of those products were. I was very happy that they were at a mall. Let's think of it the other way. What's a product that maybe there's not such a positive association if it's sold at a mall?
I was gonna say cars, but I think Tesla has proven that wrong.
Tesla kind of broke that mold. I would say ordinarily cars wouldn't be a good thing there, but Tesla kind of broke that, kind of changed that on us. I think a lot of high-end brands maybe should be a little bit careful. Sometimes they might be better off if they're either sold directly online or through a high-end independent store. I will tell you, my client that's a bicycle manufacturer, even selling a bike through Walmart in the higher end bike circles is seen as being sort of low quality. I think a mall bicycle shop would have that same connotation. It's kind of a department store bike. It's where you might buy a $200 or $300 bike. It's not where you go to buy a nice $4,000 electric bike. What about if I say something is sold on Amazon? Does that add value or take away value?
That could go both ways.
Good answer. So that was my trick question. I think it could go both ways. Can you give me an example of maybe one way or the other?
Well, for like convenience products, you want that to be on Amazon because it's convenient. More people are willing to buy it and have it shipped directly to them. But I think for higher end products, like I wouldn't want to buy an Apple computer off of Amazon.
Yeah, boy, that's very funny. Very astute of you. That's actually why I put the Apple Store after this. I was thinking the exact same thing, that, you know, that the Apple computer, they have Apple stores. They have an Apple store online and they have Apple stores in cities and in malls. So I'm not sure that I want to get that from Amazon. There's also a connotation that some products, higher end products, when they're sold on Amazon, could be counterfeits. So I agree with you. When I'm buying, you know, pens, school stuff, my wife just bought me just before the semester started, we thought we were going to be teaching in class, and she got me a whole new set of whiteboard markers. Well, they're sitting in the bag. I haven't even opened them because I haven't used a whiteboard since the spring. Things like that, I don't even question. And to your point, Louisa, I totally agree. There's a convenience aspect, so I like it when those products are on Amazon. I don't even have to go to Office Depot for that. I can order it online. We're Amazon Prime. It's going to be here in 2 days. It's just easy. But on the other hand, that high-end stuff, you know, if you want to buy, you know, something Louis Vuitton or Coach, I was actually looking for a Coach bag for my wife a little while back, a year or so back, and I was actually kind of nervous buying it on Amazon. The one that I was looking for, I got a bug or something on me. I was looking for one particular item that was very hard to find, and the Coach stores didn't have it. So I was looking to see other resellers that maybe had it. And I was very nervous about spending a large amount of money with the possibility that it was counterfeit. So, and then there's sort of one other, Apple Store. You know, how does Apple Store, how are they affected by selling at their own store? I actually think it kind of benefits them. They've created this elitist type store, not elitist in a snobby way, but if you ever really want something done quickly, done right, and compatible with your Apple computer, you go to the Apple Store. Now, we may not always like the Genius Bar. I kind of jokingly say there's not always geniuses at the Genius Bar. But on the other hand, when I've needed to get a peripheral product that had to work with my computer, I could not chance that it didn't work, I go to the Apple Store. So there is a benefit for certain things there, that even though they're not necessarily Apple products, if they sell them at the Apple store, my belief is, well, the Apple brand is going to support that, and they're not going to sell products that don't work with theirs. So channels of distribution can actually be, in my mind, an interesting one. Now let's look at things like co-branding. There's advantages and disadvantages to all types of secondary associations. I chose to use co-branding as an example of bringing some of these advantages and disadvantages out. So an advantage, we have what we call borrowed interest. When you co-brand with somebody else, you're taking from them, you're taking some of their brand with you. Now, what does that mean? That means you're getting some equity without really having to work for it. Maybe equity you don't have. Those plain wrap computers, by saying they had Intel inside, were using some of the Intel. As Intel got bigger and bigger, they were gaining from that. You also have some reduced costs. You don't have to work quite as hard to build your brand because somebody has already built their brand that you're now taking from. And I don't mean taking literally, I mean you've paid for it, but you're using their brand to increase your value and decrease your marketing cost. And by adding somebody of interest, you might broaden your appeal. So one of those that, kind of hits me is, in our family, every so often, they want to have cinnamon rolls. And me being dad, I would go to Ralph's and I would buy Ralph's brand or Kroger brand cinnamon rolls that I would make on Sunday morning. And yes, Angel, I would get yelled at because I didn't buy the Cinnabon brand or the Pillsbury brand or the Pillsbury Cinnabon brand, I think it is. And to me it was like, it's a cinnamon bun, who cares? But guess what? My wife and daughter cared. So that's one of those where there are probably some people that might not buy that product or that might not buy a generic product, but they might buy it when a brand like Cinnabon is attached to it. There's also potential for disadvantage. And what are those? Well, some of those might be you lose a little bit of control of the message. You don't control the other brand. So if, for example, you were Pillsbury and you had a cinnamon roll and you licensed Cinnabon to say Cinnabon cinnamon rolls are in our package. Well, what if Cinnabon all of a sudden had one of those PR nightmares, and somebody went to Cinnabon and opened up their box of Cinnabons, and there was, heaven forbid, a dead mouse there, and it made it onto the news. Well, if you're Pillsbury, there's nothing you can do to control that. So you run the risk of not only gaining, but also potentially losing if something goes wrong. There's also the risk, the textbook calls this the risk of dilution. And by that, it means you're now using another brand to sort of boost your brand. That means your brand is going to get some benefit out of that, but it's not all your brand. So you've kind of diluted your brand a little bit. You want to be careful that your brand is not only about other brands. And if there are negative associations, some people just hate Cinnabon. When you put it in your Pillsbury, you might lose some people because they hate Cinnabon. And again, you learn that by doing your due diligence, doing your research, and making sure you're associating with a good brand. And then the other thing that some people say is sometimes when you co-brand, you lack brand clarity. Some people begin to be a little confused, or they're not quite sure, they don't understand the association. That can happen. So among a couple of the other versions of co-branding, we mentioned both ingredient branding and licensing. So if you create a product that has cheese in it and you refer to it as California cheese, that's ingredient branding. Technically, saying Intel inside of a computer, that's ingredient branding. Now, there's other times where you're simply going to license the use of a name. That might happen, for example, with a character, which will be another thing that we'll look at in a moment. You actually license that. Maybe you license their name or just their brand to be on it. I think of things like Ford pickup trucks who have licensed the Eddie Bauer brand. People have licensed other brands for things like cars, Martha Stewart, J. Crew. So you can license names that attach to your brand, And when we talk about licensing, what we're really talking about is you pay a fee simply to use the name. In ingredient branding, you're actually using their product as an ingredient in the creation of yours. But those are all versions of co-branding. And that'll be good for you to know because that's what your homework is going to be on tonight. So let's just finish out these last slides looking at these others. Well, characters. Sometimes you will have characters that you create. Sometimes you'll have characters that you license. Sometimes the character that you create becomes a product of its own. These are examples of some of those. So Ronald McDonald is the character that they created. Ronald McDonald has in essence become their own character, and you can buy Ronald McDonald stuff. Not quite so much with Wendy's. Wendy's actually uses this character as a way of, the original daughter of the owner of Wendy's was adopted, and they named her Wendy, and then they sort of paid homage to her through this. And if you look into some of the corporate social responsibility of Wendy's, they donate a lot of money to adoption groups. You know, the Planters Peanut, Fruit Loops, the Pillsbury Doughboy. Heck, Pillsbury Doughboy has been in movies. So we can associate our brands with characters. We might create characters, we might license characters. One that was created for Camel cigarettes was Joe Camel. And for years, it actually benefited them tremendously because a lot of kids had seen Joe Camel when they were kids, thought it was cute. And then when they were 16 or 17 and started smoking, they started smoking Camel cigarettes, which is one of the reasons why the US government came down on them and said, we don't want you doing a character with cigarettes anymore because we think you're appealing to kids. But if you think about it the other way, most kids wouldn't know much about Pillsbury, but if you have that little doughboy in a commercial, it's like, oh, he's cute. Now I want Pillsbury Doughboy Cinnabon cinnamon rolls. See how I tied that back in, cinnamon rolls, in 2 different slides? I guess I'm hungry for cinnamon rolls. So characters, characters is a way that we can associate our brand. Endorsements. Now, when we think of endorsements, it's not just celebrities, but it's often celebrities. Think of it, celebrities, sometimes it's experts. Some companies hire doctors to say that this medicine works really well. Sometimes it might be an engineer that you hire. Influencers are a new form of endorsement. You know, if you think of one of the Kardashians, they are celebrities. They're not necessarily experts, but they're in this whole new area of influencers where they bring with them a huge following. And honestly, you actually can get endorsements from ordinary people. So companies like Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson have done this for years, where they would have stay-at-home moms and homemakers be their spokespeople for things like laundry detergent. And they talk about their, son going to soccer practice and getting their uniform dirty, and they have a game the next day, and how when they used Tide with, color crystals, they were able to clean the uniform quickly and get all the stains out. Sometimes it's just an ordinary person. And you might want to be the product that associates with ordinary people. So I always suggest think about very carefully endorsements and linking with other people. And again, just like we saw before, there is a risk and a reward. If you do it well, you're going to gain credibility, but there is a risk to it. What do you think happened to a lot of brands who were associated with Tiger Woods when all the bad press came out on Tiger Woods? Well, it hurt those brands for a while. What do you think happened to Subway when Jared, their ordinary person spokesperson, found out he was into kiddie porn? Well, that affected their brand poorly. So there's a risk when you bring somebody on as a spokesperson or who is endorsing your product. You want to be a little careful with that. Now, you can potentially gain instant credibility. You also have the possible problem, you may not have somebody endorsing your product for a long time. I've learned this with some of the companies that I've worked with that had either celebrity endorsements or sports figure endorsements. And most of the time, they don't write contracts that are 20 years. They don't write contracts that are 10. And in my experience, rarely were those contracts even 5. A lot of those endorsement contracts are 1, 2, or 3 years. So you might invest a lot of money in somebody endorsing your product, but you might only have them for 3 years. Now, because you guys are business students, I want you to think about this for a minute. Think about a famous sports celebrity. Let's just take, say, a Tiger Woods or a Michael Jordan who has made a lot of money on endorsements. I don't know what the number is, but let's just say that Michael Jordan got $50 million a year endorsing Nike products. I think if we look over the course of time, we would say Michael Jordan is one of the most successful athletes who has linked with a product through endorsements. He made money, they made money. But think about $50 million as an economic hurdle. For Nike to benefit from it, they have to sell not $50 million of product, but enough product to make $50 million of profit just to break even on Michael Jordan's endorsements. So at a 30% margin, they might have to sell $250 million of Nike products just to break even. Just to break even. So a common mistake that people make with endorsements is, well, we'll make a lot of money by the endorsement. When you look at statistics about endorsements, one study that I read that looked at a lot of celebrities and sports athletes endorsing products, and when they averaged all of them over a long period of time, they tended to find out that endorsements were generally worth about a 1 to 3% increase in profitability. It might boost sales a lot, but it doesn't always increase profitability equally with it. So this is one of those I just caution people, and I caution my clients. I don't say don't do it, but I say be careful and run the numbers first to make sure. A lot of people think, oh, we paid $50 million, we have to make $50 million back. No, you have to make way more than $50 million in sales back. Sorry, the last two. Events and sponsorships. Well, this is where I sometimes make that reference to the halo effect. The halo effect being that if you sponsor a cool event, if you put on a cool event, if you sponsor a cool event and people think it's a cool event, your brand kind of gets the halo effect. Oh, they're a part of this too. I guess I like them too. You know, if you go to a beach volleyball contest and there's a lot of great looking people down there at the beach and they're tan and they're wearing, you know, really revealing swimsuits, and you think it's really cool down there in Manhattan Beach, and you see a sponsor, and that sponsor might be Corona, you might go, wow, that's pretty cool that Corona is sponsoring this event. And we call that the halo effect. And again, know that with events, you have a captive audience, you have people there, you get these potentially positive brand associations. Same thing if you sponsor a team, if you sponsor an athlete, you have these positive aspects, but you do potentially have some disadvantages. One of the ones that comes up with events is, what if the event doesn't live up to expectations? If it's a brand new event and they're expecting 10,000 people to show up, there's no guarantee that they will show up. So if you paid your sponsorship based on 10,000 people being there and only 1,000 show up, that became very expensive. I'll tell you another one that I know. I have a friend who used to put on outdoor events. Hang on just one second. Outdoor events for things like outdoor sports, running, team sports. I knew him through bicycling, and he did these large outdoor consumer events where, you know, 20,000 people would show up at a large park in a lot of cities along the West Coast. Well, he did one here in Los Angeles that was at the county fairgrounds, and he booked it for August. And guess what? The weekend that he booked it was one of the very rare August rainstorms that came through. And effectively, he lost a lot of money. And he actually stopped doing live events. He said, I can't do a business that is that can be so threatened by weather. So he actually stopped doing outdoor events and he only did indoor events, even though it was for outdoor sports. So you can have that disadvantage. The other thing with sponsorships is, again, the events itself or the team or the people that you're sponsoring, you don't know what they're going to do. Nowadays, when we write sponsorship contracts, we're typically writing a lot of things like ethics clauses that say, if you do anything bad, we don't have to pay you. And we will drop you like a hot potato. And we've had enough celebrity incidents where things have happened with people that you have to have that in there. And then lastly, those third-party sources. Well, I just wanted to give you a couple of very specific examples. For many, many, many years, the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. And if you watched almost any commercial during the day of a soap product, a cleaning product, a product around the home, and if they said, and our product has received the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, that translated into sales. That was very powerful. Nowadays, we still see that. We see it in a lot of different market areas, but one of the popular ones in automobiles is J.D. Power. According to J.D. Power and Associates, our car is more reliable than any other SUV in its class. And so that would be an award or even a review. Reviews can work the same way. When your PR firm sends your product out and you get a great product review, or you can get it placed with somebody who's very reputable, again, I'll go back and say, even if they're not reputable, but they're popular, if Apple comes out with the new Apple iPhone 15 and sends one to a Kardashian and they like it and they post about it, that's money you can take to the bank. And those would be third-party sources. So that's it. That's sort of the discussion. That's where the textbook ends in the discussion of leveraging secondary brand associations as a means of building brand equity. When you guys are working on your projects in the second part of the semester, you're going to be creating a brand. You're going to be creating all the elements of the brand, and then you're going to be finding ways that you would be promoting that brand through integrated marketing communications and through secondary brand association. So that's how this is all going to tie into a project you guys are going to work on in the second part of the semester. And with that, we've sort of concluded the learning of the first part. Anybody have any questions on anything that we spoke of tonight? I was targeting to get out by 8:30. We're going to go ever so slightly over that. The homework assignment for this week is already on Moodle, but I'll just tell you basically what it is. I would like you to find a let me actually just pull it up so I'm not speaking out of turn. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing. I am going to, do I have my Moodle open? I think I left it open. Yes, I did. Let me just go into it. So very, very simply, I want you to do two things. One is going to be, I want you to find, oh shoot, I went into the grading one, sorry. Well, I want you to find some form of co-branding being used in the marketplace. I want you to identify both of the brands, and I just want you to discuss briefly, maybe in one page, how these brands are working together. I want you to give me some commentary if you think they're working together well or not well. And this could be co-branding in almost any way. This could be ingredient branding. This could be in advertising or marketing. But I want to see some kind of co-branding being used in the marketplace. And I just want you to comment if you think this is a good way of associating a brand or a not so good way. And then the second one that I would like you to do is I'd like you to find a brand extension of a product. So I used the example of Coke and Diet Coke, so I don't want you to use that one, but pretty much anything else is okay. Let me just go back in here. And I want you to simply find a product that has had a brand extension. Easy way to do that is think of a product you know, that's a branded product you know, and then think of another product that they've come out with. And that would be a brand extension. And then I want you to simply just discuss in a few paragraphs. This whole homework would be 2 pages or less. And on the brand extension, I simply want you to discuss, did the brand extension gain value from being associated with an existing brand? And did the existing brand gain value, or did it maybe lose value by having a brand extension? I just want you to explore that a little bit. I want you to think about a brand extension and a co-branding, and see if you think it added value to it or took away from value. And my experience in co-branding and brand extensions is you almost have to take every one of them on a case-by-case basis to see if it really works and has value or not. So you guys don't have to find good co-branding or good brand extensions. You can find bad ones, just so long as you comment on it, whether it's good or bad. It would be great if you find it, for example, in an advertisement. You can literally do a Google search for co-branded advertisements. You can find one. That would be a great way of doing this. Maybe just include a little picture of it just so I can see it, or maybe a link to it, because this is an area that I actually do some work in, so I love seeing good and bad examples of this. So very simple little assignment. It's really just exploring some co-branding and brand extensions, and that's it. It's going to be a page, 2 pages, something like that. You're going to turn it in next week. Remember, when we come in next week, all we're doing is review. I will answer any questions. I will have a study guide for you that'll be printed out. It'll be on Moodle. We'll probably go over that during our review. I will have a better idea of what will actually be on the midterm test. Those of you that have not had me before, I will tell you that I don't try to trick people on tests. When I ask questions, I'm asking generally what I'm using the words for. I don't try and find one little teeny thing to trick you on. And the only example that I give that I sort of trick people a little bit on is when I'm doing true false questions. Some are going to be true and some are going to be false. But I don't try to trick people on my tests. I'll try to be straightforward. So I will have a written out study guide for you guys that you'll be able to study from, and we'll use that. Is everything that'll be on the test on the study guide? No, but probably 95% is. Sometimes I forget to put something on the study guide, but I will stick pretty close to what we've talked about in class, the sections that we've talked about in class in the textbooks, and what will be on the study guide. So I'll try to be very true to what we're going to be tested on. Does that sound fair to you guys? Any questions on anything? And if not, listen, I'll stay here for a minute or two. If everybody's gone, then I won't stay here. But if anybody has any questions, stay on. Other than that, be safe. Good seeing you. Thanks for coming to class. Call me this week with any questions now that my email is back up and now that I can get back into Moodle. And I'll see you guys a little bit later next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, Professor.
Good night.
Professor. Good night.
Okay, so I think I submitted a wrong version of the document. Professor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I think I submitted a wrong version of my the brand research paper. I want to
Just
This is the mega constructs form.
email me a new version of it.
would it work if I remove submission, or will that affect anything?
See, I don't know that. I'm not good enough to know if that works. You want to play it safe? Just send me an email and say, Brian, here's the version that I wanted to send you. Please use this as my submission. And that's fine.
I'll try both of them. All right.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah,
Professor.
just know that you've got the safety valve of just sending it to my email.
All right, thanks, Professor.
Okay, thank you.
Next week.
Either one of you need me, want me?
Yeah, Dr. Brian. Hi, it's Nawaf.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. How about yourself?
You've been very, very quiet.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. And I just got kicked out by mistake. Like my Wi-Fi went down. And I don't know what happened. Just like a few minutes ago. But anyway, I wanted to ask you because I tried. I mean, like I did the request for the Facebook group a couple of weeks ago, but I haven't got.
I didn't
you
get.
You haven't accepted me yet.
I didn't get a request. Let me go there right now.
Yeah, please, you can do that. Because also like I was trying to do some like of the assignments because I missed, as you see, I missed a couple of assignments and I was trying to do them, but I I have to see the Facebook group first because I want to see what brands my classmates they already have picked up.
You know what? Don't even worry about that. Just go ahead and pick one. The only reason I do that is so that everybody doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. I don't want to do something that like somebody else who like already did.
You know, but I worry less about it because you're not, you know, you guys aren't all in class together. It's not like you're going to be sharing. Just pick a brand that you want to do.
All right,
that's
perfect.
okay. But let me go in right now into Facebook. Do you have a minute?
Yeah, please.
For me to go check it right now. Let me check that because I didn't get usually it pushes a notification to me, and I did not see one, but I will go right now. When my internet is going very slow. Let's look at members. Yeah, I'm not seeing one right now.
Really?
Yeah, what
It's Nawaf Hamdi. I did the request like probably 2 or 3 weeks ago.
And spell your last name for me. It's actually not coming up with. It should come up with that. Hamdi. Huh, I would have thought it would have come up from the previous one. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to. Let's come up to this right now. All right, I'm going to send you a link right now. Can you access your email?
Yeah.
All right, so let me just try this real quick. I'm just going to send you a fresh link right now while we're on this together.
Sure.
Quick email. Okay, I've just sent it. And when you get it, just go ahead and click on that link. You know, and I'm going to stop this recording right now.